Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yourwolfsdengaming here in the wonderful world of video games and technology, and today we're going to be taking a look at Even the Ocean for the PC. Let's get into it, shall we?
Does not compute.
A long time ago, I adored platformers. They're still one of my favorite genres of games of all time. In fact, as of this review, they're the biggest genre of games that I've reviewed via Yourwolfsdengaming. But unlike some, I didn't grow up with 2D platformers. I grew up with 3D platformers like Spyro the Dragon. Yet, despite growing up with those 3D platformers, games like Unrusty Trails and Dust and Elysian Tale have pushed and shoved their way into my gray little heart. The story of Even the Ocean is that you play as a character named Alf, a power plant technician. Oh boy, the story's already getting exciting. Oh, hold the phone there, Even the Ocean. Alf's job is to manage and keep the power plants that pump a certain type of energy in working order. After disaster strikes, it's Alf's job to go and bring the magic MacGuffin power plants with convenient platforming elements back online so that magic technobabble will continue the balance of energy and something or something other. Yeah, you can tell, oh boy, this is just engaging. Whew. Oh man, the story. Whew. And while working to bring back the Magic MacGuffin's balance, you discover characters and events that you need to aid in order to progress. No, you can't skip them. Alf will puzzle platform the way to staggeringly dull victory through stunningly similar puzzles, and I had to check my previous footage to make sure these weren't the exact same platforming levels. We'll talk about that in a bit. If the issues I have with Even the Ocean were a sandwich at McDonald's, they'd amount to be 3 Big Macs superglued together, drenched in extra large orange soda. But this review is late. Really late. Partially because I'm miserable and I despise my very existence, and partially because this took several rewrites as a review for me to really figure out how I wanted to write my thoughts down about Even the Ocean. This is particularly due to the game itself. The game is terribly slow to start up, between its wheelchair slow startup and the fact that 30 of my initial 60 minutes with the game were just spent scrolling through partially broken text boxes. Didn't exactly help the game's case. So I walked away, took a break, apparently a very long break, and came back a little while later. The problem I had with the game aren't fixed, but the game really opens up after an hour or so into the game, so I pushed through regardless. You know, shoot me. As previously noted, the game divides itself into 2 very distinct parts. One part consists of the story elements, and the other part is the platforming. If you're not in a power plant or power plant-like place, we'll get to that part later as well, you're in a story bit, and vice versa. What do I mean by story bits? Well, in the story bits, most of the dialogue events don't really matter in the context of the story, but the game makes sure to show you these sideshow events like they somehow mattered regardless. These aren't just sideshow events. Many conversations are forced into the story even when they don't make sense to happen. For example, one part forces the player to talk to a certain character even when there's no reason for it to happen. There's just no reason to go to said character and chat it up. Especially when there's disaster and the world kind of ending. But the game acts like it's the only thing in the world that matters. Remember in Batman Arkham City, when the game itself, Oracle, mentions how Batman avoids getting the cure from Joker, even to his own detriment? Even the Ocean does the same thing, except it removes the part where Oracle actually brings it up, or any self-reference at all, making Even the Ocean look ignorant to what it's doing. If the player is anywhere that's not a power plant that powers the city using the Magic MacGuffin, be prepared to be interrupted no less than every 5 minutes for character interactions that fall somewhere between going on far too long and why won't these stupid text boxes just stop level of quality. The worst part is that the story feels forcefully inserted, often interrupting the gameplay in the process. The developer tries to create this big world, but then proceeds to fill it with practically nothing beyond the power plant or power plant-like puzzles, and the lore is almost exclusively to everything about or somehow involving the Magic MacGuffin. Worse, the text boxes for each character interaction scroll at what seem to be random intervals. Sometimes the text boxes for a character's dialogue will just stop and expect the player to manually scroll it down to the next bit of dialogue, and sometimes it just won't. Worse, sometimes text boxes will just stop mid-sentence, leaving the player wondering whether it's going to scroll or not, or whether the game's messed up. I'm going to go with just the game is messed up. This wouldn't be bad if there was voice acting, so I would know when to keep scrolling, but there's not, and if the player just keeps pressing the "please just hurry up and let us drawn out conversation" end button, the player could miss useful information. Because the font is large and the text box is small, it means conversations play out for what seems like an eternity, because you just keep having to press move forward with this conversation before I die button. Most conversations and dialogue segments fall into two camps, which is either they're useful or they're just meant to waste time, and the game has a tough time deciding which one of the dialogue options at any one point it's going to be. Sometimes it's useful to build the story or section of the world Alf's in, and other times the dialogue just gets in the way. There's actually a lot of really cool areas and background art in the game, and I would have loved to learn more about those areas, but you just don't. You just don't learn anything about them. Why is this giant pit in the middle of nowhere here? I don't know. He's just here. At one point, you should listen to the literal entirety of a Bit Crush song to continue. Not just a Bit Crush song, but a Bit Crush song with the same broken dialogue system mentioned previously. And no, you can't skip it. It's like a minute and a half, and you just have to listen to the whole song. Which doesn't sound bad until you realize you've already listened to more dialogue previously. The story itself isn't much better. We'll skip some of the plot points, but we'll leave off the story by saying that the game plays off itself with the image of it being much more clever than it actually is. The ending particularly only makes sense in a vacuum. Despite all the dialogue this game dedicates to the story, it actually explains very little. Somehow, the game ends with a flood engulfing the world. Why? Why? I'm sure there's something involving the story if it held my attention and I didn't fall asleep partway through. Because the story called for it, for all the dialogue this game spends on discussing the magic MacGuffin and the emotions of one-off characters you literally never see again. The story never actually explains anything about it, other than that the energy forces are important. It's a Star Wars cop-out, where any seemingly glaring plot hole is covered up with magic, fate, and/or destiny, depending solely on what's convenient in the moment, and not what's convenient for the story as a whole. The world was destined to be covered in a flood, and the only thing Alf could do was slow it down. Which is stupid. And if there's an issue with the game, where the game just ends at the end, and there was nothing the main character could have done, what was the point of ever telling the story? The gameplay goes in the following order. Go to the platform area, fix the power plant, go to the city, go to another city, go to the power plant, fix the power plant, and repeat. You do this not once, not twice, not 3 times, you do this over 6 times, and that's the entirety of the gameplay. As for the gameplay itself, the only time Alf really does any kind of platforming is during those power plant and power plant-like areas. I say power plant-like areas because for those who play the story mode of the game, yes, there's different modes, you'll end up realizing that literally every single puzzle platforming area is essentially the power plant. At one point, you get to go into giant monsters. You get to literally go, well, not literally, you get the idea. You get to go into giant monsters and you're going through their guts. You're walking on their guts. And that area is the exact same as the power plant. They still act as the power plants do. Even at the end where you have to put a little pole in like a rectangle or something. And you have to plant a bomb. It's the exact same puzzle. You go room to room, then take a magic stick and put that magic stick in a rectangle. Every single power plant and power plant-like place has the exact same conclusion and plays out exactly the same. Whether it be in a tower that's decades old, power plants, or giant monsters, all the puzzle places play out the same. This is like a crossword puzzle on the back of a cereal box, where the only difference between one crossword puzzle and the other is that they flipped the crossword puzzle upside down. Sure, there's slight variations in puzzle type, but everything else is the same. Imagine the first level of Super Mario Bros., and instead of going into a castle on the next level, you just play the exact same level with the contrast turned slightly up, a few of the colors are reversed, and it mixes a few dry bones in. The monsters have the exact same puzzles as all of the power plants. I know I already said that, but I just want to make sure. I want to hammer it in. I want to make it abundantly clear that the monsters, these giant crystalline monstrosities, these giant crystalline flying monstrosities, play out almost exactly like the power plants do. Don't get me wrong, the platforming isn't bad. While yes, the platforming is basic as can be, there's a nice idea somewhere in the muck. Essentially, at the bottom of the screen, Alf has to balance the energy inside. If the bar goes too far one way or another, she'll gain added abilities depending on which way the bar goes. If it goes too far beyond that, she dies. It's not entirely unique, but it would have been interesting enough to hold a game up on its own. Unfortunately, that's the only interesting part of the puzzle platforming. All the puzzles are really basic, and because it's at certain points impossible to completely balance the energy bar in the middle, Alf will often feel off during controls because the game forces you to go one way or another at certain points, which makes the controls worse, which kinda defeats the purpose of the whole idea. While the idea of gaining certain powers based on her level of energy is interesting, it's ruined because it also affects how Alf actually controls as a character. The effects don't just give her added speed or height jumps, but actively change how the character controls, which makes controlling her to be frustrating. Worse, there's lots of points in the later game that encourage Alf to use one ability or the other, meaning that the player will die not because of being bad at the game, but because the controls actively become worse. It's not uncontrollable, but it makes the player feel like they're missing far more jumps than they're supposed to. The same goes for pretty much every character the player meets as well. All those characters the player meets during the story outside of Whiteforge, might as well forget about them now, as they don't matter. That kid that sabotaged an elevator because he was angry at how people seem to have abandoned what supposedly matters, doesn't matter, ironically. The loner scientist in the second continent, doesn't matter. The cool couple in the ancient library, doesn't matter. None of them matter. They could have all just as easily been replaced with cardboard standees of Alan Wake for how much they matter in the context of anything. And even a good cake gets rather tiring after the 17th piece. But this isn't a good cake. It's a cake from your nearest Dollar Tree or pound shop. It's filled with plenty of game time at 6+ hours for what it costs, but it's almost entirely made of sugary paste. For its downsides, I did finish the game, after all, but I didn't willingly. And as a bit of foreshadowing to my conclusion, it's not exactly a ringing endorsement for me to unwillingly finish something. Visually, the game is a mixed bag. The overworld and most of the backdrops look gorgeous. So gorgeous, in fact, that they were the reason I requested a review code originally. But there's a reason that there's maybe all of 2 screenshots of the puzzle sections on the Steam store page for the game. And it's because they look meh. The outside backdrops look beautiful. Seriously, look at these backdrops. Look at them. Look at them. Look at the backdrops. Do you see that? Look at they're beautiful. They look amazing. But the pixel art itself for things like the platforms and characters, I hate to be sounding like, you know, I hate to sound rude, but, well, you know, to put on my pompous voice, isn't exactly AAA quality. Most of the characters look simply like lumpy potatoes, and the platforming section all looks like they were created years before the actual backdrops were. The backdrops in the outside areas visually look both alien, yet stunning, and it reminded me actually a lot of Morrowind. But the indoor places like the power plants look both interchangeable and bland. Again, I at one point actually paused the game, saved it, shut it off, and I went back through like an hour's worth of footage trying to figure out if this was actually just the exact same place and I had been to the wrong area. That's how bland they are, and I should never have to do that. I really wish the visual style from the outside areas transitioned to the inside, because they're of a stunningly high quality caliber compared to everything else. Particularly the Dream World area was visually adorable, yet bizarre to wander through. It was great! It was fun and creative! Where's the rest of that? Where's the rest of the fun and creativity? Where is it? Do you see it? I don't. As for the audio, the music and soundtrack isn't bad? Can we say that? It wasn't bad? Okay, it wasn't bad. As with many soundtracks, I wouldn't consider it memorable, but the tunes and melodies were at least okay, for the most part, and they generally fit the areas they were placed in. That's the best thing I can give it. With the controls, I already talked about my gripes. Despite those issues, the controls themselves have full customization, and the settings for visuals, full screen options, etc., are all perfectly acceptable. The only real issue is that the game started off with Japanese controls by default, meaning that the buttons for enter and exit are reversed. not a huge oversight, especially if you've had, like, Japanese imported consoles. Like, I have a Japanese PSP 1001 that does the same thing. But, again, if you never used a controller and you didn't have a controller plugged into the game, you wouldn't have been able to figure that out, because it's different with the keyboard layout. But it could certainly confuse some people, probably the majority of people. But most of the things do just simply make the game easier. I mean, it's cool that there's a difficulty slider, and there's tons of things to adjust and turn on and off to make the game easier, but most of the things to adjust, again, simply just make the game easier. It doesn't give you a variety, a challenge, and again, even if it makes the game easier, the core complaints about the story itself really don't change. And again, they give you a nice handicap, but the game is already bordering on easy by itself. Overall, I can't really recommend the game. I'd like to, I'd really like to, and that's sad to me. I don't want to not like something. I especially don't want to not like something that I put 6+ hours into. It's kind of a long time. But the gameplay just doesn't do it enough for me to really suggest the game. The only thing I could really suggest the game for is for the speedrun mode, if that's your thing. If it's not, I can't really recommend it. And most certainly not for its retail price, considering there's far better platformers out there for the exact same price. So yeah, I mean, if you like the speedrun mode, if that sounds cool, maybe get it on a sale. That's probably my best suggestion, but other than that, there's just not really much there for me. And the weird thing is the developer's previous game, which was kind of like a Zelda 1 game, kind of, actually looked better pixel art wise. Like, not the backdrops, but like the pixel art itself looked better. So I don't know what happened there. Maybe it was a style choice, but I don't know if Lumpy Potato is a style choice. I'm going to go on a whim here. I'm going to go on a whim and say Lumpy Potato art is not a style choice. Maybe it is. I'm not an artist. I wouldn't know. I only write things. So yeah, this has been Yourwolfsdengaming, taking a look at Even the Ocean for the PC. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If not, you know, that's cool. Let me know why. I'll improve if you guys want me to. If there's something I'm doing wrong, let me know. I'll look into it. So yeah, this has been Yourwolfsdengaming, taking a look at Even the Ocean. I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a good one, ladies and gentlemen.